Well, hello and welcome to Raj Sabha TV. You're watching discussion today with me, Rajat Kane. In this edition of the show, we'll talk about the proposed changes to India's mapping policy. Well, the Department of Science and Technology announced sweeping changes to India's mapping policy specifically for Indian companies. Now, maps and accurate geospatial data are crucial for national infrastructure projects such as linkages of river, creation of industrial corridors and deploying smart power system. Emerging vibrant technologies like Digital India, smart cities, e-commerce, autonomous drones, delivery, logistics and urban transport require a leap forward in maintaining with great mapping with greater depth, resolution and precision. So what does these proposed changes to mapping policy means and how this policy will enable Indian innovators to create substantial advances in mapping, ultimately making our lives easier and empowering small business. To discuss further on this important issue, we're joined with Professor Ashutosh Sharma. He's Secretary Science and Technology, Government of India, and Mr. Rakesh Verma. He is CMD of MapMy India. Well, many thanks, gentlemen, for joining us. Let me start with you first, Professor Sharma. Just for the benefit of our viewers, considering this subject is fairly niche, and how the proposed changes to the mapping policy will be beneficial. What exactly are the changes and how they'll be beneficial? Just a preliminary guidelines for that for our viewers. Sir.
Right. So let me first say that geospatial data is the key to any kind of planning, any kind of development, governance, whether it's infrastructure or services. Everything rests on geospatial data, which is the foundational positional data, and then you make maps based on it. And maps are description of the features that you see in there. So clearly, for every sector, it has a very widespread importance, which is why these guidelines are so critical. It's really a historic moment in the 250 years old journey of surveying and mapping in India. And clearly our demands for the change, they come from the fact that today we need unprecedented accuracy, even down to few centimeters in our mapping. We need a speed because oftentimes the data which is needed has to be even real time. And then we need a scale, which means the entire country, if you would, because it has very wide implications for agriculture, for farming, for mining, for logistics, which means delivery, services, e-commerce, construction of all kinds, whether it's dams, rivers, highways, railways, transportation, and even communication, 5G coming up, where you want to position your towers, for example. So there is not a sector, there is not an application which is not touched by surveying, mapping, and making applications on top of that. So which means for planning and for execution. So what I want to say is because of the new demands of accuracy, speed, and scale, we need new processes, we need new guidelines to be able to do our mapping effectively and in time, and basically empower the entire geospatial sector, which is in line with the vision and direction of our Prime Minister, which means it is about ease of doing business. It is about empowering all agencies that do surveying and mapping, both in public and in private sector. So there are basically, we look at these guidelines as three things that it needs to do, that it would do. The first is what you would call liberalization. So liberalization is about having minimal regulations. It is not having approvals, vetting, very tedious processes that historically might have taken few months and very complex. So clearly, if you wanted to map the entire India speed with the old processes, with the old technology, that's not going to happen even in decades. we cannot today, modern life cannot wait that long to wait for development. So the first one is liberalization, which means that both the public and private agencies, companies, do not need prior approval
Okay.
for surveying and mapping. Second aspect of liberalization or is the democratization of the processes of the geospatial data. Now, this democratization means that all the data which has been created with public support, with the government support, ought to become available to other government agencies so that there is no duplication. You can save a lot of time. You can have the right kind of accuracy. So different surveys, they do a geospatial survey or the foundational layer, which is topographic. On top of that, go attributes, descriptions of each where is the forest, where is the hospital, what is the population density, and so on. All of these layers ought to fit with each other, and that happens when different surveys they work together, so they collaborate. Not only do government agencies collaborate with each other, but also government agencies ought to collaborate with the private sector. So that would bring in the speed, that would bring in all that we need to do very, very quickly. So all the data that government has, that ought to be shareable. And it ought to be shareable in a form which is useful, which is digital. There are standards for these things.
Okay.
What the guidelines propose is that all the government data should be freely shareable with all the other government agencies, and it should also be shareable with the Indian companies
Right.
at a fair pricing, which is transparent and with the ease of access, so that this would totally empower our geospatial sector, companies, private sector. And like I said, the collaboration is very necessary to be to do our job. And we'll go to Mr. Rakesh Verma. But let me just add one more thing.
Sure, sir. Sure.
So often people think, look, if there is liberalization and stuff, it favors maybe private sector. This is not the case here. It's not a zero-sum game. The only winner in this case is the development in the country. So the government agencies are also empowered equally by these guidelines. For example, Survey of India does not need any approvals to do their mandate, which is survey and mapping. So therefore, is an creating the level playing field both for public and
Right.
private
Right.
players in geospatial data, creation of data, acquiring data, using data,
Right, sir.
sharing data, and so on. Another important aspect of guidelines is the data which is fine, which has accuracy less than a meter, maybe even centimeter. That data can be acquired only by the Indian companies, and it can be used by them, right, to build applications and so on. So I think that would provide a huge push to our private sector in geospatial data. Okay, so I stop there.
Right, right. Thanks, many thanks, Professor Sharma, for explaining it threadbare to our viewers. We'll certainly come back to you here. Professor Ashutosh Sharma, his Secretary, Science and Technology, explaining us the new proposed changes to the new mapping policy. Joining us, Rakesh Verma is CMD of MapMy India. Mr. Verma, what is a current scenario in which mapping is used, and in what applications mappings are used for end users?
Well, mapping is used across every industry, every government departments. I don't know. I remember 25 years back when we founded this company, two of us, me and my wife, we had this vision that 80% of any data will have a geospatial component. Can anyone deny that today? No. From MapMindia perspective, the usage of data, map data, is unlimited. If you think of the taxes department in the government, be it property taxes, be it income tax, be it indirect taxes of GST, every place the departments and the government is using this geospatial data, and MapMindia is happily providing the support there to
Okay.
get into helping the government in understanding where the taxes are not being paid and things like that. If you think of the logistics area, take the example of Amazon
Okay.
or Flipkart. They are making the deliveries. Behind that, the entire data, the APIs, map APIs from MapMindia, they're using to ensure that the delivery happens at the right place. If you
Absolutely.
think of financial services, be it HDFC Bank or PhonePe or Paytm, the usage is of the similar kind. So I can keep giving you examples all across any industry. Automotive, if you think of, every car that is being driven today with navigation built in, it is the MapMindia maps. Now, I can share with you some interesting example.
Absolutely,
When
sir.
we have to put the potholes in those maps, and if it takes 2, 3, 4 months for approval to put that POI into the map, the purpose was getting defeated. So this liberalization is changing all that you don't have to go for for prior approval and kind of self-certification and self vetting is sufficient for carrying out. The impact of all this is on all the industries. While we have heard that 1 lakh crore of worth of business can be generated within the geospatial industry,
Okay.
but if you look at the total impact, it's going to be much more. Just to give an example of logistics and area, currently 14% of the GDP comes out as a cost for logistics industry. I think with the proper usage of map and proper applications on top of that, and with the data, not just maps, but data of all kinds, the net savings the cost can come down from 14% to 9%, and that has been estimated by the government itself. I guess I can keep going on, but these are some of the examples.
Right, sir. So many thanks for your opening remarks. We'll certainly come back to you. Professor Ashutosh Sharma, as both the panelists, both you and Mr. Verma, have been quite clear how this policy will marry several services, I beg your pardon, and of course, it will be a great interface for the industry as well. In terms of the employment generation, how will it help the industry, sir?
Let me give you another compelling example of an application which is going to be a game changer.
Okay.
This is the Swamitva scheme, which was launched by Prime Minister. The idea is that people in rural areas ought to have their property papers, what is called patta. So they know what is their land, what are the boundaries of that land. Imagine that if everybody knew what they own, they could get a loan from a bank against that. Right now, what do? They have to go to a money lender with exorbitant rate of interest, for to get money. This is going to totally empower our people in very large number of villages and so on. Imagine all the property disputes which are going on there, right? I mean, I think majority of cases involve land and so on. So clearly, by demarking the boundaries of your plot, of your ownership, whole lot of these problems can be addressed. And so that has a very huge impact on the way we do business, on our societal processes, on our banking, our finances, and so on. Okay. So that is just one example of how pervasive the use of mapping and surveying is. So we were talking about the fact that that this is very empowering. Let us take another sector, which is startups or technology startups. Now they of course generate a lot of employment. In fact, it is MSMEs and startups that have huge amount of potential to generate new skill sets, to have the speed, to have the energy to generate jobs and have a huge economic impact. So you see, the startups, they would have 2 or 3 different things to do because of liberalization of geospatial sector. The first one is building tools for mapping and for surveying. For example, your drones, lidars,
Okay.
cameras, and so on. as well as if you were to do applications like in agriculture, hyperspectral imaging, the sensors for that, the software for that. So it's about building applications on geospatial data. Applications like what is the health of your crop, what is the moisture in your soil, and so on. It's about making tools for surveying. It's about acquiring the geospatial data to provide services
Right.
of generating data as well as building applications on this data. And of course, so that creates jobs in IT sector, in software, and so on. Karen, if you were to integrate the impact of maps, as was pointed out by Rakesh ji, that this is all pervasive. It is distributed in every sector. So clearly, if you were to accelerate, for example, your building, if you were to accelerate the logistics, as was already pointed out, so clearly, all these developmental efforts
Right,
would
sir.
therefore would lead to new jobs because new skills are also needed, new jobs are needed to run the
Sure.
entire thing as well and to build applications. So, as a tight summary,
Let me just pick thoughts from Mr. Verma. Mr. Verma, since you represent this industry and you're an important stakeholder in terms of the new policy, the proposed changes to it, uh, in the current scenario, what are the regulatory mechanisms that you see changing and opening up brighter avenues in the mapping?
I hope you meant with these changes, what are the avenues that will open up? Am I right?
I meant, in the current scenario, what are the mechanism which you see would change for better with the proposed
Did I
policy?
say completely? What I said was
Oh, sorry, sir.
with the changes that have been brought in with the liberalization,
Yes, yes.
you are okay. Well, as a part of MapMindia, as part of the industry, I will say that personally, I had to spend 50% of my time in getting the validation, approval, and all that from the agencies. Now, is that the time I should be spending, or I should be spending the time on creating new wealth for the country, for MapMindia, both? So, simple thing is this liberalization is now going to let industry prosper. Lot many startups will come up with lot of technologies and the use of artificial intelligence, the kind of street view which even MapMindia possesses, but that technology is fully available. One of the things that comes into my mind is there's no dearth of technology in our country.
Right.
It's a wrong impression that we have to be dependent on foreign technologies. At least in the geospatial space, I can say very confidently, MapMindia has been an Atmanirbhar since its inception. Today it is Atmanirbhar, so we feel proud in participating in the Atmanirbhar Bharat direction. So the point is now with the technologies available, technologies people can lean on, it will be a big boon for the startups, and you will see mushroom of startups coming up, developing applications, using the map APIs. Maybe everybody may not have the map data of the kind that is required. Selected few companies might have it, but still using their APIs, the application to serve the citizens, to serve the industries, to serve the government will be just unlimited, is what I believe will happen in the next few years itself.
Right, right. So these are the benefits that you're counting and how it will help new industry to emerge and new startups to mushroom. Sir, Professor Sharma, as we are just about to close the show, sir, in terms of the safeguards and security, how is the new policy placed, sir?
oh, absolutely. So security is certainly a vital concern. It ought to be totally factored in. There cannot be any compromise with the security aspects.
Absolutely.
And the guidelines totally incorporate that, which means to not to have security, but also have development at the same time. It is not an either or option. So therefore, for example, that there are no restrictions on surveying and mapping. Basically, in any area which is physically accessible. So if an area is not physically accessible for whatever reason, then certainly one cannot map and survey there. Similarly, in order to have Atmanirbharta, to empower both the public and private agencies that do surveying and mapping, it is the guidelines basically say that all geospatial data produced using public funds, except that classified geospatial data, would be freely shareable with all the other government agencies and also shareable with the private sector at fair pricing, but with the ease of access. And also, you see the data which is in big demand. For example, data with high accuracy, data with accuracy less than 1 meter in horizontal and 3 meters in vertical, that would be available only to the Indian entities. And so therefore, I think it's going to be very empowering, as well as the fact that the surveys in Indian territorial waters, as well as on the ground, would be limited to Indian companies. So the sum of all this basically leads to Atmanirbharta in geospatial data and products. So really, there are there are no unreasonable restrictions on making data, generating data, using data, sharing data, and so on.
I
So security is totally taken care of.
Absolutely.
Like I pointed out, that if something is off limits physically, then the guidelines is not a license to intrude into your property.
Right, sir. Right,
on
sir.
this one,
Yeah. Many thanks for that point, sir. Mr. Verma, sir, yeah, you're about to say something, sir?
yeah, on this one, I may just like to add one small
Absolutely. Please go on,
state.
sir.
These guidelines have put the onus on the private sector a big responsibility that the private sector should be accountable and responsible for what they are doing,
Right.
not trying to show two couple of things like if you're standing in Leh Ladakh and showing that it is part of Republic of China, or it is not something where India's sovereignty is violated. So these are the kinds of responsibilities the private sector has to bear with, and that's where I see a challenge when the open street maps come in with whatever ways they want to depict India or any kind of a data. Something I wonder how that can be handled.
Right, sir. So certainly, I'm sorry, time is short with us. We would have discussed more, but certainly, it's a big change. It's a welcome, of course, across the industry in terms of the proposed changes to the new mapping policy and how it will play out in broadening the avenues of not just the industry but also in the personal pursuit, of course. And there are safeguards, as we have the government representative, Professor Ashutosh Sharma, mentioning how this policy is taking care of each and every thing threadbare. Many thanks, Professor Sharma, for joining us and explaining each of details of this extremely new and important policy. And many thanks, Rakesh Sharma, sir, for explaining or rather bringing to us the voice of the industry and how effectively this new policy will give you a new dimension. Many thanks. And many thanks to our viewers for joining us and watching this edition of Discussion Today. Stay tuned to Rajya Sabha TV for more. Thank you and goodbye.